everybody. Welcome back to the Remembering Project, where we gather the scattered pieces of who we are and invite them home, one breath, one story, one sacred yes at a time. I'm your host, Martina, and I'm so excited you're here with me today. I know we've had a couple weeks where there was no podcast, and that is because I've kind of been thinking about what I want the cadence of this project to be, just because it's just me doing it. So I'm doing all of the recording, all of the research, and trying to market it a little and put it out. And it's a lot for one person. All of those things could kind of be their own job. And doing it on a weekly basis is really tough, especially when I work, full-time outside of this, and also have some other projects I want to work on. So I'm thinking we're probably going to switch to kind of an every 2-week cadence, give or take a little. I really just want this to have the space to be shared and to grow as I'm inspired and as there's a need to talk about things, or as I experience something in my own life that I think would be useful to share. And so today we are talking about a topic that I actually think is really useful, and that is the freedom to begin again as many times as it takes. Right? And that's something I really know in my bones just through life experience and having had things work out, having things sometimes not work out the way I thought they were going to, is that beginning again isn't something we just do once in life. We begin again and again and again, and that's not because we failed, but because as human beings, we have experiences, and through them we grow and learn. And I think if we're doing life right, we're always still becoming. And as we change, what we want out of life sometimes changes, and that's normal and okay. And I think that happens especially when we've been through a heavy experience like caregiving, or, even I've had times in my life where I know that I've lived kind of just on autopilot and continued doing the things that I do because that's what I've done, and working toward whatever goal it was that I had because that's what I had in my head as being the thing that needed to happen. And then sometimes in the middle of it found that I wasn't really happy, or that goal didn't mean as much to me now as I thought it did back when I first started working toward it. And I think that's a pretty common experience. Sometimes we can feel when we change our minds, or if something doesn't work out the way we wanted it to, a little embarrassed that it wasn't all we thought it was going to be. And then we've talked to people about it and told them this is what I'm doing now. And then we feel a little sheepish changing things. But I really do think that, if you're going to be true to yourself and true to living the best life you possibly can, you have to be willing to listen to yourself and to start over when it's necessary, because there's no shame in trying something and not liking it. Just as there's no shame in trying something and thinking, oh my God, this is the best thing ever, I'm going to do it for the next 30 years, and being lucky enough to get to do so, right? We have to be flexible in life and responsive to the seasons of our life, and to the ways in which we change, and the ways in which part of our soul's desires stay the same, right? So when I launched this podcast back in May, episode 1 was titled Embracing the Journey of Starting Over. And that first episode held a lot of hope and a lot of fire, because I was really excited about starting this project. And I really believed that I was stepping into a brand new season of my life when I did so, just like I've believed that any time I've started something new. And I believed that because it was true, right? I was starting something new. But what I've come to understand in my life and in this work is that starting over isn't just a single moment. It's a rhythm a returning, a sacred spiral, a cycle, right? And that cycle, or the beginning of a new cycle, and those cycles mirror the cycles in nature, because we as human beings, right, we're just like any other animal. We're a part of nature, and we're subject to her seasons and cycles. And so the great thing about that is that there may be times when the cycle is kind of on a downward shift, and that doesn't always feel so good, but we always know that it's going to change and that we're going to be back up again, because that's just the nature of how things move. And the other thing is that sometimes, our beginning is really just the bravest step we can take in this moment from where we are right now. Right? And because that's constantly changing, life keeps meeting us with more experience. We get more happiness, more grief, more clarity, more truth, sometimes more confusion. And then we find what direction we're being pulled in or pushed in, and we find ourselves beginning again. And so after my caregiving chapter ended, I knew my life was going to change. Everything I had been doing, my whole kind of purpose over the years I was caring for my mom, had really become taking care of her and being responsive to her needs. So when I lost her, when she passed away, it wasn't just that I lost my mom, which on its own, right, she's like one of my favorite people in the world, and I loved her so much. That on its own would have been devastating, but then when your whole life has become wrapped up in caring for someone, that becomes such a huge part of your identity. So it's not just that she passed away, but it's like my whole daily routine was gone, and I didn't know what to do. I felt so lost. I knew things were going to change. I knew that there was going to be a starting over, and that was even just having the idea of starting over, let alone actually taking any kind of action to put that into implementation, was such a huge shift after putting my life on hold for several years to walk my mom through her journey with dementia. And so, when we lose someone or when something big happens, so often we kind of experience these big polarities. So on the one hand, I was in this deep grief at what had been lost, and at the same time, there was part of me that was kind of dreaming about new structure, new freedom, new direction, even though the ability to do those things had all come at the cost of losing someone very important to me. And so I started thinking about first I was just really depressed for a while, but after I started realizing that I had to do something, I started thinking, what is it that I'm going to create for myself? Right? And while all of this is going on, there were moments where the quiet hit, where the grief came in waves, where I felt exhaustion and disorientation, and questions that once seemed so simple to me didn't have simple answers anymore. And, as I started going to grief counseling and emerging a little bit from my grief, I realized that I wasn't done. My life had changed, but that wasn't over. And so I started looking at what kind of a new beginning could I choose for myself. And as it turns out, 5 years later, the beginning I chose for myself at that time is not what I'm doing anymore now. And that's okay. I mean, it was fun until it was no longer fun. And it didn't stay a part of my life, because it was really just a surface layer, and I hadn't gotten down to the roots of what I wanted to do or who I wanted to be yet. And there's no shame in that, right? Just like there's no shame in replanting when a crop doesn't take. Just like there's no shame in rewriting a chapter that doesn't quite fit us anymore. And so, since my mom passed, since I stopped being a caregiver, I've chosen to begin again more than once. And that's happened especially in my work and creativity. One of the first things I did after losing her was work as a copywriter for a motivational speaker, and was a really interesting experience. I applied for this job that was going to be really, really competitive because he was kind of well known, and there were a ton of people who just wanted a job working for him because they admired him and wanted, proximity and wanted to be close to him and close to the work he was doing. And at the time, I kind of felt like, yeah, I'm probably not going to get it because there are going to be so many people. And what ended up happening was I hadn't even applied to be a copywriter. I had applied to be like an admin person. And I actually did not get that job, and then got called back about, would you be interested in, there were extensive application materials and a lot of writing and video recording and stuff that went into applying. And I got a call back afterwards saying, hey, we didn't pick you for this position, but would you be interested in maybe working with us as a copywriter? Which for me was, I had always dreamt about, writing professionally. And I had before, writing for my own creative work, but this was different because it wasn't just me deciding to create something and hiring myself to promote it, but somebody else coming and saying, hey, do you want to do this for us? And for a while, that job was really fun. I had never worked in marketing before, so it was all new, and I love learning new things. And as time went on, I found that it reminded me kind of some of the things I don't love about the coaching and personal growth industry. I think it's an industry that can be very helpful and useful. And it's also an industry that sometimes is a little disingenuous and kind of makes people think like there's something that need to be fixed. And I don't believe that you or I or anyone really is a thing to be fixed, as much as that we have these experiences and we need to grow through them. And, sometimes we have more serious problems that need more serious work, or maybe an expert or professional to help us through them. But in general, I don't love the idea of people needing to be fixed. Because a lot of the time we just need some kind of spark or direction or reorientation. But anyway, that's a whole other subject. Back to what I was saying, which was just that I was so excited to start that work. And as I started doing it, what I found was it really wasn't as creative as I was hoping it would be, because so much of it, and I don't know, because that was my only experience working in a really formal copywriting and marketing environment, other than just doing like some content mill type stuff, which is really different anyway. In the past, was that, the job was basically kind of following a formula of rinsing and repeating and kind of reworking the same thing over and over and over again. And so it turned out to be something that was not so much a chance to be truly creative as just kind of following this formula that didn't allow for a lot of creativity, which, if you are creative, kind of tends to suck your soul. So that ended up leading to burnout. For that and for other reasons as well, I made the choice that I would leave. And it's, funny, because when I started working there, I was like, this is so amazing. I'm going to do this forever. This is going to be my last job. I'm going to retire from here. I love this. And by the end, I really did not love it anymore, and I wasn't enjoying it. And so because I had been, while I was working that job, I actually went back to college and studied integrative healing arts and got to work in disciplines like hypnotherapy, aromatherapy, coaching, and spiritual studies. I really was reminded about, I hadn't been in school since I was working on my master's degree and my PhD coursework like back in the 90s. And I'd forgotten how much I love being in that environment. So when I left that job, I thought, okay, I'm going to find myself a job at a college, which is exactly what I did. I worked in my next starting over was at a college being a employment specialist, working with students, helping them find work study. And it was just really fun getting to mentor these young people who were super excited about getting out into the world. And I only was doing that part-time. So I had, the rest of my days to work on creative work and writing and to try to grow kind of a little side hustle business that did not grow as quickly as I thought it would. So there came a point where I thought, okay, I'm going to have to start looking for something a little more full-time and a little more permanent. And so as much as I loved working at the college, I made the choice to quit. And there I was starting over yet again. And so, during the time I was working there, I started hosting a paranormal podcast called Wandering Spirits of the Pacific Northwest with a friend. And it was such a beautiful and curious project that gave me space to explore the in-between and to kind of look at the paranormal as a way of processing grief, and, was motivated by this idea, like if I could find some kind of proof through doing this paranormal work and this paranormal research and podcast of there being life after death or some spirit that lingers, then that means that my mom's spirit, that my friend Becky who passed, her spirit, right? All of these people that I've lost and all of these animals even are still out there somewhere. And that idea was really comforting to me. Now, in reality, I don't know that I got like 100% palpable proof out of the experience, but it was so much fun and so interesting because I've always been interested in paranormal stuff. And I met so many incredible people through doing it that, it was a really fun experience. Again, one that I didn't think would end as abruptly as it did. But that's just the nature of life sometimes. And that ending freed me up to start this podcast here that you're listening to and to start working on some other projects. And then somewhere in there while I was working on the podcast, I ended up switching jobs from working at the college to taking that kind of education experience and working for a government agency that supports the implementation of education policy for kids with special needs. And so I promise I will be done with the Martina show and talking about all the things that I've done in the last 5 years soon. But I promise you, I'm sharing this to make a point. I never have been a huge rule follower. So, if you pay me to do a job and you have rules, I'll do it because you're paying me to do it. But in general, I'm not a huge rule follower. I'm not a super bureaucratic kind of person. I'm pretty laid back and probably too loosey-goosey in my personal life on, implementing strong structure and stuff like that. But the thing that has been so cool is because I allowed myself to test this out, is I found that I am really good at taking policy, complicated legislative stuff, and translating it into user-friendly language that hopefully helps parents and educators help kids and hopefully makes their lives a little easier and better because of it, and gives them more access, the kids especially, more access to education. And if I hadn't been willing to just try something new like that, I would have never known that about myself, right? And while I love my job, and I've loved the things that I did before, or I wouldn't have been doing them either. Even though not everything becomes a final destination, everything we experience, right? I've used my experience as an example here, but you have your own experiences. Everything we experience, even those things that are far from perfect, teach us something valuable and add something meaningful to our life that we carry forward with us, whether whether it's a skill or finding out that, yeah, I've been a good writer all my life, but there's this whole other area of writing and research that I didn't realize that I was really good at and that I can make a difference in the world with it. Right? And even though I love my job, that doesn't mean that like my life has stopped and is because it's perfect now. Even now, I'm working on another kind of new beginning of a lifelong dream that is not quite ready to share exactly what it is out in the open, but I can tell you that I'm working on it with the goal of having it summoned into reality by Samhain, right? Samhain and Halloween are not the same things, but they happen at the same time of year, of 2026, right? And I think that our goals like that, or our ability to say, hey, I'm going to, that thing I've been thinking about for 10 years now, I'm going to try to do it. I'm going to try to make it happen, come from our willingness to experiment and explore and let ourselves be successful at making change. And I'll tell you that one of the biggest lessons I've learned since emerging from the role of caregiver has been that my happiness is non-negotiable. Life is so short. We don't know what's coming. We don't know, no matter how many plans we make, we don't know what's coming for us. And we don't know what we're actually going to be able to do and what we won't be able to do. And I really learned during the time of dedicating myself to someone else's care that I had spent so much of my life trying to meet other people's, prior to that, trying to meet other people's expectations or hanging on too long in jobs that were making me miserable. And I've really made an intentional effort to have happiness as one of my core values, right? We have things in our lives. All of us have these things that we have to do, right? Sometimes even in a job we love, there are tasks that we don't love as much as the others. That's normal. That's just being an adult and what happens. Not everything we do can be our favorite. But if something is really making us fundamentally miserable or unhappy, we should not stick with it, right? We're worth more than that. So one of the things that I've really decided for myself is just, I don't stay in places or relationships or situations that don't contribute to my overall happiness. And so when it becomes obvious that a situation is causing me more grief than joy, I start thinking about how can I either make the grief go away and make there be more joy, or maybe if I can't, it's time to move on. And that happens because I've started to become good, probably too late in life, because I wasn't good at it when I was younger. I've become good at listening to what it is my soul is asking for, right? Because I've decided that I'm worth that. I deserve to be happy, and so do you. You're worth that too. And so each shift, each kind of new chapter of finding what is it that's going to make me happy now, what is it that's going to make you happy now, is a kind of beginning again. And that's not failure at all, but a form of self-trust, right? And beginnings don't always have to be dramatic. It doesn't have to be moving cross country. I mean, it could be. But sometimes it's also a quiet shift, a slow unraveling, a sacred yes that you whisper to yourself when no one is watching or listening and you are just alone with your heart and what it wants. And the other thing that you have to see, the other thing you have to know is that healing's not a linear path. It loops, it circles, it deepens, and you may find yourself on the same threshold more than once as you heal, but that doesn't mean that you haven't changed, right? Because you have. Our experiences change us, and so even if something comes up again, we're meeting it with more wisdom, and with that comes more honesty and more soul, which is something that makes every again sacred. I think sometimes the universe places things that are meant for us in front of us more than once, because maybe we didn't say yes the first time. Maybe we weren't quite ready yet. And so every time that you stay with yourself, every time you make that choice, and especially when you do it after a false start or a fall or a period of silence where you just really don't know what it is that you want, you can't hear that voice inside. Every time you choose to stay with yourself and stick it out and figure it out, that's healing. And like I said, sometimes the beginning doesn't look like a leap. You know, if you're really depressed, it can be crawling out of bed. It can be answering one email or returning one phone call. It can be putting a foot down when a boundary has been breached because you finally have the realization that you deserve people in your life who listen to you and who collaborate with you, right? It's all about deciding not to abandon yourself, even if you've done it many times before. So if you're finding yourself at another beginning, or maybe even just craving one, or if the beginning you thought would change everything hasn't, I invite you to ask yourself, right and gently, without recriminations, what is it that I'm beginning again? Not from the first time, but from a deeper place. What wisdom did the quote-unquote failed start actually offer me? What small act of trust can I make toward myself today? Right? And if it helps, really consciously give yourself permission to begin again as many times as it takes. You know, I was scrolling through Facebook or Instagram or some social media the other day, and I saw this guy pop up. I don't remember who he was. He wasn't someone I recognized before, but he was from before, so I don't know who he is, but he was talking about this idea of why, when life gives you unlimited chances to try again, would you not take that chance? Because that's such a gift, right? So if things don't work out the first time, figure out a way to approach it from a slightly different angle, or even just approach it again. Sometimes it's just that the timing wasn't right? So don't give up on yourself and don't give up on your life. And so, as always, I hope this information has been useful for you, and I thank you for being here, and I hope you'll meet me again for the next episode. We're kind of in that period of the first harvest still that began with Lunasa on August 1st. So we're going to be talking about this idea of reaping what we've sown, and how, it's only September. We still have a whole other quarter. If you have goals or things that you wanted to create in 2025, you still have a lot of time to recalibrate and to look at really what is it that you're reaping right now. Is it what you want? Is it something you want to change? And yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit. And so if today's episode met you somewhere tender, or was meaningful for you, or you know someone who you think would benefit from it as well, I would love it if you would consider sharing it. And just remember that you're allowed to begin again as many times as it takes. You can also support my work by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Podbean, or by liking, sharing, and following me on YouTube and on my Facebook. And thank you so much for being here and for walking this path with me. Until next time, may you remember, you're not too late, you're not too much, and your new beginning is already waiting for your yes.